with a heavy tray of half-empty cocktail glasses in my hands, and a smile stretched so tight across my face, I thought my skin would crack. I watched my own daughter and the stepson I raised as my own laugh and mingle with their guests. My feet ached. My back was sore. And my heart. Oh, my heart was breaking. They had turned me into a servant at their party, a party they were hosting in my garden. The garden my husband and I poured our very souls into for 40 years. They smiled and nodded as I passed by, collecting empty glasses and discarded napkins, the invisible, elderly help. But they had no idea, my dears, that the main event of their little social gathering was about to be cancelled by its owner. And the owner, you see, was me. Hello, everyone. I'm Grandma Carol. My name is Carol Jennings. I'm 68 years old, and I'm speaking to you today from my little slice of heaven here in Charleston, South Carolina. This garden, this piece of land, has been my entire world for most of my life. It's seen me through a beautiful marriage. It's seen me raise 2 children, and it saw me through the grief of losing my beloved husband, Robert. This is a story I've kept hidden behind a wall of climbing roses, so to speak, for about a year now. It's a story about how the prettiest flowers, the ones you nurture and love with all your being, can sometimes hide the most venomous thorns. It's about a lesson I learned far too late in life, that sometimes you have to prune the branches that are poisoning the whole plant, even if those branches are your own family. Until today, I haven't had the heart to tell anyone the full, humiliating truth of what happened at that party. I was too ashamed. But I've come to realize that the shame wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. Before I begin, my sweethearts, I would be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support, your kindness, it feels like a warm ray of sunshine on an old woman's back. It gives me the courage to finally weed out this painful secret and let the truth see the light of day. Thank you. The party. They called it an evening in the Jennings garden. It was a joint birthday party for my daughter, Jessica, who was turning 40, and my stepson, Mark, who was turning 42. They decided to host it together, a grand affair to show off their success to all their important friends, their business partners, and the local high society they were so desperate to impress. And what better backdrop for their ambition than my garden? The garden that had been featured in magazines. The garden that people in this town had been admiring for decades. I was, at first, so happy for them. I spent weeks preparing. I worked from sunup to sundown, making sure every petal was perfect, every hedge was trimmed, every path was swept. I wanted it to be a magical night for them. When the evening arrived, it truly did look like a fairy tale. We had strings of lantern lights twinkling in the branches of the great oak tree, soft music drifting through the air, and the heavenly scent of the night-blooming jasmine I had planted with Robert so many years ago filled the air. The guests were all dressed in their finest, sipping champagne and marveling at the beauty of it all. "Carol, your garden is a masterpiece," they'd say. "It's the most beautiful place in all of Charleston." And my heart would swell with pride. But as the evening wore on, a subtle chill began to creep in. I noticed that when Jessica or Mark introduced me to their guests, they'd say it with a strange, dismissive air. "Oh, and this is my mother, Carol. Yes, she's the one with the green thumb," as if I were a quaint little hobbyist and not the architect of the entire landscape they were standing in. The moment it truly turned sour came about an hour into the party. The catering staff they'd hired was busy with the food, and a line was forming at the bar. Jessica came over to me, a breezy, false smile on her face. "Mom, you're not doing anything, are you? Would you be a doll and help out a bit? Maybe take a tray of drinks around. The caterers are swamped." I was a little taken aback. I was the host's mother, not a member of the staff. But I saw the stress on her face and thought, "Of course, dear, anything to help Bejo." I told myself she was just overwhelmed. So I smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart." I went to the bar, and the young man handed me a heavy silver tray laden with glasses of wine and cocktails. As I began to move through the crowd, offering drinks to my children's guests in my own home, a feeling of profound unease began to settle over me. Then Mark saw me. He strode over, not with a look of gratitude, but with one of instruction. "Mom, good, you're making yourself useful," he said, his voice low. "When you're done with that tray, can you go around and start collecting the empty glasses? They're starting to pile up on the tables." And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't them being overwhelmed. This was intentional. I looked at them, my daughter, my son, standing together, laughing with a wealthy-looking couple. I saw how they looked at me, a fleeting glance in my direction, a little nod as if to say, "See, we have the help well-trained in." They weren't just hosting a party in my garden. They were acting as if it were theirs, and I was just a fixture that came with the property. The humiliation washed over me in a hot, sickening wave. I saw the looks on some of the older guests' faces, people who had known me and Robert for years. I saw their pity, and that was worse than anything. They saw what was happening. They saw my own children treating me like a hired servant. My smile became a mask, a fragile shield to hide the hurricane of hurt and anger that was suddenly roaring to life inside of me. I kept saying "excuse me" and "pardon me," collecting glasses with hands that had started to tremble, not from the weight of the tray, but from a deep and profound rage. The grand finale of the party was supposed to be a guided tour of the garden, led by me. It was printed on the elegant invitations. But as I stood there, invisible in a crowd of people, holding a tray of other people's trash, I made a decision. The tour was canceled. And so was their little charade. To understand the depth of that insult, to know why turning me into a servant in that particular place was a wound to my very soul, you have to understand that the garden wasn't just a piece of land with flowers. It was my life. It was my marriage. It was the living, breathing heart of our family. My story with this garden began in the year 1985. My husband Robert and I had just gotten married. He was a kind, gentle man, an architect by trade, with a secret passion for botany. I was a young landscape designer, full of dreams. We bought this house, a charming but neglected old place on the edge of town. The house itself needed work, but the yard was a disaster. It was a tangle of overgrown weeds, thorny vines, and sad, struggling trees. It was a mess. But we stood there, on what was then a patchy, dying lawn, and we didn't see the mess. We saw a canvas. We spent that first year just clearing the land. Our days were filled with sweat and dirt and the ache of sore muscles. We pulled up stubborn roots, we amended the soil, we fought back the thorny brambles that seemed to grow back overnight. Robert, with his architect's mind, drew up the plans, the graceful winding stone paths, the placement of the koi pond, the gentle slope of the lawn down to the creek. I, with my knowledge of plants, designed the tapestry of colors and textures, which roses would catch the morning sun, which hostas would thrive in the shade of the old oak, which flowers would bloom in succession, ensuring there was beauty in every single season. It wasn't just a project. It was our love story, written in soil and stone. I remember the day we planted our first rose bush together, the Pisces rose, right by the front door. We dug the hole together, our hands touching in the cool, dark earth. I remember the pride we felt when we laid the final stone on the patio. A patio we built ourselves, stone by heavy stone. We celebrated with a bottle of cheap sparkling wine, sitting on an overturned bucket, our clothes covered in dirt, watching the sunset from our new patio. We were exhausted, and we had never been happier. Into this world of dirt and dreams, our children were born. First came Mark, Robert's son from his first marriage, which had ended in tragedy when his wife passed away. He was a quiet, serious 6-year-old boy when I came into his life. He was grieving, and he was wary. I knew I had to tread softly. The garden became my way of reaching him. I didn't push him to talk. Instead, I invited him to help. I gave him his own little patch of earth and a packet of sunflower seeds. I taught him how to plant them, how to water them. And when those sunflowers grew, towering over his little head, the look of wonder and pride on his face was the first real smile I ever saw from him. He started calling me Mom that summer, not because I asked him to, but because it felt natural. He became my son in every way that mattered. Then, a few years later, our Jessica was born. She was a vibrant, joyful child, and she adored the results of the garden, if not the process. While Mark found a quiet satisfaction in the work, Jessica found her stage in the beauty. She would have elaborate tea parties for her dolls on the manicured lawn. She would pick bouquets of my prize-winning dahlias to decorate her room. She loved to wear her prettiest dresses and pose for pictures among the azaleas when they burst into their spectacular spring bloom. She was so proud of the garden, but in a different way than we were. We were proud of the work we had done. She was proud of the impression it made. Our family life was woven into the seasons of that garden. Every Easter, we'd have a massive egg hunt, with Robert and me hiding hundreds of eggs in the tulips and under the leaves of the giant ferns. The 4th of July meant a huge barbecue on the patio, with the sound of the little waterfall from the koi pond mingling with the children's laughter. In the fall, we'd harvest pumpkins from the vegetable patch Robert insisted on keeping, and we'd carve them right there on the grass, the smell of pumpkin guts and autumn leaves all around us. The garden was our sanctuary, our shared accomplishment. As Mark and Jessica grew into teenagers, they started to use it for their own social lives. They'd host pool parties and birthday celebrations. I was always happy to share it. I loved seeing the garden filled with young, happy people. I saw it as them being proud of their home, of the beautiful thing their parents had created. I never saw it for what it was slowly becoming in their minds: a venue, an asset, a backdrop for their own lives that they were beginning to take for granted. Mark, ever the practical one, would talk about what a fantastic wedding venue the garden would make. "Mom, you guys could charge a fortune for this," he'd say, looking at it with the eyes of a businessman. Jessica would dream of being featured with the garden in a society magazine, imagining a photo shoot of herself, draped elegantly on the stone bench overlooking the pond. Their dreams for the garden were about what it could do for them, how it could elevate their status. Robert's and my dream was simpler. It was our home, our love, our legacy. Before he passed away, we were sitting on that same bench, watching the fireflies begin to dance over the lawn. He took my hand, his was so frail then, and he made me promise. "Carol," he said, his voice a soft whisper, "promise me you'll never let this go. Never let anyone turn it into something it's not. This is our place. Protect it." I promised him I would. So when my children put me in an apron and had me serving drinks in that garden, they weren't just disrespecting me. They were disrespecting my husband. They were disrespecting our entire life together. They were trampling on the sacred ground of our love story. And they were breaking the promise I made to the love of my life. They saw a venue. They saw a backdrop. They completely failed to see that they were standing in my heart. And I knew, as I picked up another discarded napkin, that I had to keep my promise to Robert. I had to protect our garden, even if it meant protecting it from our own children. After Robert was gone, the garden became my lifeboat. In the suffocating silence of the house, it was the one place I could still feel him, still hear the echo of his laughter on the breeze. The rhythm of the seasons became the rhythm of my healing. Tending to the plants he had loved, watching the seeds we planted together grow and flourish. It was my way of keeping my promise to him. It was my way of keeping our love alive. For the first few years, the children seemed to understand. They were gentle with my grief, bringing the grandchildren over to visit, speaking of their father with love and respect. I thought we were a family united in memory, a three-legged stool, just like before. But I was mistaken. A stool with only one strong leg is destined to fall. The trouble began, as it so often does, with small suggestions that sounded like care. It started with Jessica. She came over for tea one afternoon, and we were sitting on the patio, the one Robert and I built. She looked at my intricate, sprawling flower beds, the ones filled with rare perennials and heritage bulbs I had spent years cultivating. "You know, Mom," she said, stirring her tea, "this is all so beautiful, but it must be an awful lot of work for you now. Have you ever thought of simplifying? We could pave this section over, put in some lovely modern flagstones, maybe a built-in fire pit. It would be much more low maintenance, better for entertaining. I tried to smile, but it felt stiff on my face. "Oh no, sweetheart," I said gently. "This is my favorite bed. Your father and I brought back that Alpine lady's mantle from a trip to Vermont. And those delphiniums? They took me 5 years to get just right. It's not work to me, it's joy." She sighed, that little puff of air that meant she was frustrated with me. "I know, but Mom, you have to be practical. It's just a bunch of dirt. Just a bunch of dirt." The words, so casual, so dismissive, felt like a physical blow. This bunch of dirt was a living history of my marriage. But I held my tongue. "She doesn't understand," I told myself. "She is just trying to be helpful in her own way." Oh. Then it was Mark's turn. He came by a few weeks later, ostensibly to help me fix a leaky faucet, but his eyes were roaming the garden with a calculating look I was beginning to recognize. He gestured toward the small orchard at the back of the property, where Robert had planted old, heirloom apple trees. They didn't produce much fruit anymore, but their blossoms in the spring were breathtaking, and the gnarled, twisted branches had a sculptural beauty. "Mom," he started, wiping his hands on a rag. "I've been thinking. Those trees are really past their prime. They're unproductive. What if we took them down? We could build a really nice, large storage shed back there. A proper place to store all the party tables and chairs instead of cramming them in the garage." "Take the trees down?" I was aghast. "Mark, your father planted those trees the year you graduated from high school. We used to have picnics under them. Don't you remember, honestly?" "No, not really," he said with a shrug. "I just see a lot of wasted space. We could make this property so much more functional." My inner monologue began to spin with anxiety. Was I being unreasonable? Were they just being practical, forward-thinking adults? But it felt like more than that. It felt like they were chipping away at my world, trying to erase every trace of their father's touch, every memory that didn't fit into their modern, functional, entertaining, focused vision of what my home, our home, should be. The conflict went from a slow simmer to a rolling boil the following spring. Mark came over, and this time he had a folder with him, full of spreadsheets and printouts. He sat me down at the kitchen table as if he were about to give a corporate presentation. "Mom," he announced, "I've done the research, and I have a serious proposal. We need to start renting out the garden as a commercial wedding venue." He slid the papers in front of me. There were projections, pricing tiers, marketing plans. "Look at these numbers," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "We could be clearing 6 figures a year, easy. We could hire a full-time grounds crew. It would be a fantastic way to help you with expenses. And it would finally monetize this incredible asset." Asset dot. The word hung in the air between us, cold and ugly. My home. My sanctuary. My husband's legacy. An asset to be monetized. I felt a cold horror creep up my spine. I pictured hordes of strangers, drunken wedding guests trampling my flower beds, caterers setting up heavy equipment on the lawn where my grandchildren hunted for Easter eggs. The beautiful, sacred silence of the evenings shattered by loud music and fake sentiment. It was a desecration. It went against everything Robert and I believed, everything I had promised him. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. Mark stared at me, his face falling. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated, pushing the folder back toward him. "This is my home, Mark. It is not a business. I'm not turning my life into a wedding venue for strangers. I made a promise to your father." This is when his face hardened. The mask of the concerned son fell away, and I saw the cold ambition underneath. A promise to Dad? Dad would want us to be smart. He would want us to secure our financial future. "You're being selfish, Mom. You're just sitting on a gold mine, and you won't let anyone benefit from it." Jessica, who must have been waiting in the wings, chose that moment to enter. She had clearly been briefed. "Mark is right, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "We're trying to think about the future, about our inheritance. Don't you care about what you're leaving for us? Inheritance. There it was. The word they had been thinking, but had never dared to say. They weren't looking at my garden as a place of beauty and memory. They were looking at it as a future payout. They were waiting for me to die so they could cash in my life's work. My heart felt like a patch of earth that had just been salted. In that moment, I knew that nothing good or loving could grow between us anymore. From that day forward, the garden became a battleground. They stopped asking for my permission and started informing me of their plans. Just a heads up, Mom. We're having a few friends over for a barbecue on Saturday. Jessica would announce over the phone the day before. And a few friends would turn out to be 50 people, with cars lining the street and music blasting until midnight. They treated the place like their own private country club, and I was just the live-in groundskeeper. I started to feel a sense of dread every time I heard their cars pull into my driveway. The simple joy I took in my gardening, the peace I felt with my hands in the dirt, was now constantly tinged with anxiety. Who would be showing up this weekend? What new suggestion would they have for me? What part of my life would they try to claim next? I would look at their faces during these impromptu parties, laughing and holding court, and I would see strangers. It felt as if a noxious, invasive weed had sprung up and completely choked out the sweet children I had once known and loved. Their words, their casual sense of ownership, their complete disregard for my feelings. It all felt like little drops of poison, slowly but surely killing the roots of the love I had for them. I found myself weeping at odd times. I'd be out deadheading the roses, and my own tears would be watering the plants. I was crying for my lost husband, and now, I realized, I was crying for my lost children. The final escalation, the thing that led directly to that humiliating night, happened about 2 months before their joint birthday. They came to me together, a united front. They didn't ask. They told me. "Mom," Jessica said, her voice bright and final. "We have great news. Mark and I have decided to host our joint birthday party here in the garden. It's going to be a huge affair, the party of the year. We've already booked the caterer and sent out the invitations." I was stunned into silence. They had sent invitations to a party at my home, without even speaking to me first? A huge party? I finally managed to say. "Dears, that's a lot of wear and tear on the lawn. 100 people? Oh, Mom, don't be like that," Mark chimed in, using his most placating, manipulative voice. "This is really important for our careers, for our social standing. All our most important clients and colleagues will be there. We want to show them where we came from. We want them to see the beautiful home you've made. We thought you'd be proud of us." And there it was. The guilt. The emotional blackmail. Dying. They knew it was my weak spot. The idea that I wasn't a proud, supportive mother was more than I could bear. And so, against my better judgment, against the screaming alarm bells in my own head, I gave in. I swallowed my hurt and my anger, and I agreed. A part of me, a foolish, desperate part, still clung to a fragile hope. Maybe they were right. Maybe if I hosted this one perfect party for them, if I made the garden more beautiful than it had ever been, maybe seeing all their friends admire our home would finally remind them of what was really important. Maybe my love, expressed through my beautiful flowers, could still fix the growing, ugly rift between us. I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't being used, that my family wasn't broken beyond repair. I was hoping for a miracle. What I got instead was an apron and a tray. I moved through the party like a ghost in a floral apron. My smile was a mask, my movements were automatic, my spirit had retreated to some small, safe place deep inside me. Each discarded napkin I picked up felt like another piece of my dignity being thrown away. Each empty glass I collected felt heavier than the last, weighted with a sorrow so profound it threatened to pull me to the ground. I avoided the eyes of my old friends, the ones who knew Robert, the ones who knew the real me. I could feel their pity like a physical touch, and it burned more than the condescension from my own children. They saw a queen reduced to a scullery maid in her own castle, and the shame of it was a bitter pill in my throat. My mind was a whirlwind of grief and humiliation. "Oh, Robert," I thought, as I speared a stray cocktail olive from a tabletop. If you could see this. If you could see what they've become. I felt his absence then more keenly than I had in years. He would never have allowed this. He would have seen the calculating ambition in their eyes. He would have protected me. But he was gone, and I had failed to protect myself. I had let my love for them, my desperate need for their affection, blind me to the truth. They didn't love me. They loved what I could provide. A beautiful backdrop, a free venue, a live-in, unpaid servant. The final straw, the single tiny spark that ignited the entire forest fire of my rage, came from my own daughter's lips. I was standing in the shadows near a large camellia bush, momentarily hidden from view as I stacked dirty plates onto my tray. A woman I didn't know, one of Jessica's new wealthy friends, gestured toward me and said to Jessica, "My goodness, your mother is working so hard. Is she part of the catering team?" I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I waited for Jessica to defend me, to correct the woman, to say, "Oh no, that's my mother, the host." Instead, I heard my daughter let out a light, tinkling laugh. A laugh that was pure performance. "Oh, that's just Mom," she said, her voice dripping with false saccharine affection. "You know how she is. She simply can't help herself. She has to fuss over everyone. It makes her happy to feel useful. It makes her happy to feel useful." Not alone. The world seemed to stop. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar. In that one sentence, Jessica had not just lied. She had rewritten my reality. She had taken my profound humiliation, my silent suffering, and twisted it into a story of her own choosing. The story of the happy, dotty old mother who loves to serve. She erased me. My feelings, my pain, my dignity. None of it was real. Only her version mattered. And in that instant, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The part of me that made excuses for them, the part that clung to hope, the part that was willing to swallow any indignity in exchange for a crumb of their affection, it was utterly annihilated. The grief and humiliation that had been churning inside me for hours, for months, for years, suddenly crystallized. It turned from a hot, messy agony into a cold, clear, diamond-hard certainty. I set the heavy tray down on a nearby stone bench. The sound of the plates clattering against the silver was loud in the sudden silence of my mind. The trembling in my hands stopped. The ache in my back vanished. I straightened up from the apologetic stoop I had been holding all night, and I felt my spine lock into place. I was done. I was done being useful. I was done being sentimental. I was done being a doormat in my own home. My promise to Robert wasn't just to water the plants and pull the weeds. It was to protect our sanctuary. And I finally saw, with terrifying clarity, that the greatest threat to this sanctuary was not blight or pests. It was the casual, callous entitlement of my own 2 children. The party was over. Not just for tonight. Forever. I began to walk. I moved out from the shadows of the camellia bush and started across the lawn, toward the small raised deck where the jazz trio was playing. Every head I passed turned to watch me. I suppose I must have been a strange sight. A little old woman in a dirt-stained apron walking with the unswerving purpose of a general. My children saw me, their conversation faltering. I saw a flicker of confusion, then annoyance cross Jessica's face. "What is Mom doing now?" her expression said. As I walked, my purpose became clearer with every step. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to cry or scream or list my grievances. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to reclaim my home. I was going to remind them, and all of their important guests, who was really in charge. I reached the small stage and walked up the 3 steps. The bass player, a young man with kind eyes, faltered in his playing, unsure of what was happening. I leaned in and spoke to him, my voice low but firm. "May I borrow your microphone for just a moment, please?" He looked at me, then at my children across the lawn, then back at me, and simply nodded, switching the microphone stand to face me. The music trickled to a stop. A hush fell over the 100 or so guests. All eyes were on me. I saw Mark and Jessica start to move toward me, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. But it was too late. I was already in control. I tapped the microphone lightly, and the sound echoed across my garden. I took a deep breath, looked out at the sea of confused faces, and began to speak. My voice was clear, calm, and carried the authority of 40 years of ownership. "Good evening, everyone," I started, my voice ringing out with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "My name is Carol Jennings, and I want to thank you all so much for coming tonight to celebrate Jessica and Mark's birthdays here at Inaimi Garden." I put a gentle but unmistakable emphasis on those two words. "I trust you've all enjoyed the food, the music, and the scenery." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. I saw Jessica stop dead in her tracks, her face pale. "I know," I continued, "that the invitation you received mentioned a guided tour of the garden with me as the final event of the evening. I was very much looking forward to showing you some of my husband's and my favorite plantings." Another pause. I looked directly at my children. Their faces were frozen in a rictus of panicked disbelief. "Unfortunately," I said, and my tone became cool and decisive, "I will have to cancel that portion of the evening's entertainment." A wave of confused whispers rippled through the crowd. "You see," I explained, my voice steady as a rock, "the owner of the garden has had a rather sudden and profound change of heart. And the owner is me. I find that I am suddenly very tired and wish to have my home and my garden to myself for the remainder of the evening. The party is over. I must ask you all to please finish your drinks and depart within the next 15 minutes. The gates will be locked promptly at 10 o'clock. Thank you so much for your understanding." For a full 10 seconds, there was a stunned, absolute, deafening silence. You could have heard a rose petal drop. The guests just stared, their mouths slightly agape, looking from me to my children and back again. Then the spell broke. A quiet, embarrassed shuffling began. No one wants to be caught in the middle of a family execution. People started to murmur their apologies, quickly downing their drinks and looking for the exit. They moved with a quiet urgency, not wanting to be the last ones to leave. As the guests began to stream toward the gate, Jessica and Mark finally broke out of their paralysis and rushed toward me, their faces contorted with a mixture of incandescent rage and sheer panic. "Mother, have you lost your mind?" Jessica hissed, grabbing my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. I looked at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face, my expression unreadable. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply looked at her with the cold, dead eyes of a love that had finally been extinguished. "No, Jessica, for the first time in a very long time, I believe I have found it. You have embarrassed us. You have embarrassed this entire family." Mark snarled, his face red and splotchy. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking," I said, pulling my arm firmly from Jessica's grasp, "that this is my home. You were guests here, and your visit is over." I turned my back on them, a gesture of finality that was more powerful than any insult. I walked over to the bewildered head of the catering staff. "You and your team have done a wonderful job," I said to him calmly. "Please, pack up your things. Your full payment, including a generous tip, will be wired to you first thing in the morning." I left my children standing there, sputtering and fuming, their grand party crumbling into chaos and humiliation around them. I walked away from the noise, toward the quietest part of the garden, the moon garden, filled with white flowers that seemed to glow in the twilight. I reached out and touched a petal on a moonflower vine, its blossom soft and cool like silk. The air was still fragrant with jasmine. The party lights still twinkled in the trees. The garden was quiet again. It was mine again. Standing there alone, under the stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The battle was over. I had kept my promise. I was finally, truly, free. The silence that descended upon my garden after the last guest scurried away was unlike any silence I had ever known. It wasn't the peaceful, gentle quiet of a normal evening. It was a ringing, echoing silence, humming with the energy of what had just happened. The party lights still twinkled, casting a magical glow on the scene of the disaster. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. My children stood before me, their faces pale under the fairy lights, their expressions a curdled mixture of shock and fury. The final confrontation was here. "What was that?" Jessica finally hissed, the words tight and venomous. "Are you senile? Have you completely lost your mind? You have single-handedly ruined us. Every important person in this town was here tonight. We will be a laughingstock. We will be a laughingstock." "The only thing I ruined tonight, Jessica, was your plan to use me as your personal servant," I said, my voice as calm and quiet as the koi pond behind me. "You wanted to show everyone where you came from. Well, now they know. You come from a woman who will not be disrespected in her own home." "Disrespected?" Mark spat the word out as if it were poison. "We threw you a beautiful party. We brought all of our successful friends to your house to show you off. We were trying to include you, and you repaid us by humiliating us in the most public way imaginable." And in that moment, I saw the chasm between our worlds, so wide and deep it could never be crossed. They truly didn't see it. In their minds, they were the generous benefactors, and I was the ungrateful old woman who had flown into an inexplicable rage. Their entitlement was a wall so thick, no truth could ever penetrate it. "You weren't including me," I said, my voice hardening. "You were using me as a prop. You were using my home, my garden, my husband's legacy, as a stage for your own ambition. And you put me in a costume and told me to serve the drinks. The humiliation was all mine until I decided to give it back to you. It seems you don't care for the way it feels." I took a step toward the house, my house. "The party is over. You need to leave now." "We're not going anywhere," Jessica snapped. "This is our family home." "No," I said, stopping and turning to face them one last time. "This is my home. You have mistaken my love for a license to do as you please for far too long. That ends tonight." I reached into the pocket of my apron and pulled out my house keys. "Your key will no longer work in the lock as of tomorrow morning. You are no longer welcome on this property unless you receive a specific invitation from me. We are done." They stared at me, dumbfounded. The sheer finality in my voice, the absolute power I had reclaimed, left them speechless. They had no response. Their anger, their threats, it all meant nothing, because I had taken away their stage. Defeated, seething with a rage that had no outlet, they turned and stomped through the garden, their angry footsteps bruising the perfectly manicured lawn on their way out. I watched them go, and for the first time, I felt no sorrow, no pang of loss, only a profound, quiet, and cleansing relief. The social fallout was immediate. The next morning, my phone began to ring. It was my true friends, the ones who had been there for me for years. "Carol, I'm so sorry you were put in that position," one said. "Good for you for standing up for yourself," said another. We all saw what was happening, and our hearts were breaking for you. They rallied around me, their support a warm and comforting balm. The news about my children, which I heard through the Gentletown grapevine, was quite different. They had, as Jessica feared, become the talk of the town, but not in the way they had hoped. Their ambition was seen for what it was, a ruthless, shallow social climb that had been built on the back of their own mother. The story of their humiliation of me, followed by my quiet, dignified rebellion, had made them look foolish and cruel. Their attempt to soar into the highest echelons of society had ended with them being kicked squarely off the ladder. The humiliation they had so carelessly tried to inflict upon me had boomeranged back and hit them with a force they never saw coming. In the weeks and months that followed, a deep and abiding peace settled over my life. I had my garden back. I would wake up with the sun, take my coffee out onto the patio, and just listen to the birds. The oppressive weight of my children's expectations and demands was gone. The joy returned to my gardening. I started a small, informal club with a few of my dearest friends. We'd meet once a week to trade cuttings, share tips, and simply enjoy the beauty of the world together. The garden, which had become a battleground, was once again my sanctuary. People, at this age, I finally understand something essential. A garden, just like a family, requires constant, diligent weeding. You must have the courage to identify and pull out the things that are choking the life out of everything else, no matter how much it pains you to do so. For years, I had let the weeds of my children's entitlement and disrespect grow unchecked, because I was afraid of leaving a bare patch of earth. But I learned that sometimes you have to clear the ground to allow healthier, more beautiful things to grow. Children, remember Grandma's words: never, ever let anyone make you a guest in your own life. You are the owner. You hold the deed. You set the rules of the house, and you decide who is welcome in your garden. Do not hand over the keys to anyone who does not treasure the gift you are giving them. If Grandma had known these truths earlier, perhaps things would be different. I would have taught my children that my love was a gift to be cherished, not a resource to be exploited. I would have taught them that respect is the soil in which all healthy relationships grow. But in my desire to give them everything, I forgot to demand the one thing that mattered. I loved them so much that I forgot to teach them how to love me back properly. So if you are out there, feeling like the unpaid help in your own family, if your kindness is constantly being mistaken for weakness, I beg of you, find your voice. You don't have to cause a great and terrible scene. You don't have to set your world on fire. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to calmly announce that the party is over. Sometimes all it takes is turning off the lights and locking the gate. Finding my voice on that clear summer night was the hardest, and ultimately, a very good thing I have ever done for myself. It was a rebirth. And sharing that story with you now, my dears, feels like the final healing step. Your quiet support helps me keep that voice strong, and I am so grateful. If my story resonated with you, I would be so thankful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps our little community grow. And I truly hope you'll share a piece of your own life in the comments below. Tell me about a time you had to reclaim your own garden. Reading your stories of strength gives strength to me, and to everyone else who finds their way here. As for Jessica and Mark, there is no fairy tale ending to that part of my story. It has been a year, and they have not spoken to me. I have received no apology. From what I hear, they are still waiting for me to apologize to Hanem for the public embarrassment I caused. They still do not understand what they did wrong, and perhaps they never will. I have had to mourn the loss of the children I thought I had, the sweet little boy who planted sunflowers, and the joyful little girl who danced among the roses. But I can tell you honestly that I do not miss the people they revealed themselves to be. The constant anxiety, the feeling of being used, the slow erosion of my own spirit, I do not miss that at all. In my will, my home and garden are to be preserved as a public trust so that their beauty can be shared with everyone forever. My children will be provided for financially, of course, but they will not be the owners. I cannot give them the one thing they wanted because I know they would not protect it. They would sell it to the highest bidder before the funeral flowers had even wilted. My love for them is a sad, distant ache now, like a phantom limb. But my peace? My peace is real, and it is present every single day. So remember, my dears, to tend to your own gardens. Nurture what brings you joy. Cultivate what brings you peace. And have the courage to mercilessly prune whatever brings you pain. Everyone deserves a place of peace, most especially a place within their own heart. May you all be treated with the gentleness you deserve. Grandma will always love you all. Thank you for listening. Love you all. This is Grandma Carol, and I'll see you in the next story.